The Scopes trial is one of the most famous examples of the conflicts that occurred between the fundamentalists and the modernists that occurred at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. The fundamentalists wanted to interpret the Bible literally, that the Bible was the divinely inspired, inerrant Word of God. Jesus was divine, the miracles were real. And the modernists wanted to interpret it in a more secular way. In many cases, they were interested in science and evolution, and they wanted to subject the Bible to higher criticism. The case itself surrounded John Scopes, a teacher who had filled in for the biology teacher at his school for 2 weeks and probably hadn't taught evolution, but had used a textbook that did teach evolution. And this was a violation of the Butler Act, which in Tennessee forbade the teaching of the belief that man evolved from lower order animals or questioning the divine creation of humanity. So Scopes was enlisted by the ACLU and some lawyers there who also got the famous attorney Clarence Darrow to be the lead attorney for the defense in order to be part of the case. The defense team, according to a New York Times article on July 8th, wanted to, quote, pave the way for a suit which might later, no matter what happens at this trial, be taken to the United States Supreme Court. On the prosecution side, William Jennings Bryan was the most famous member, and for his part, he saw the trial as evolution versus the Bible. That same New York Times article reported him saying, quote, why these men would destroy the Bible on evidence that would not convict a habitual criminal of a misdemeanor. The trial was very famous and drew a lot of attention even before it began. That same article, talking about Bryan's arrival, said, quote, about 300 people, 50 of whom were reporters and photographers, met him at the station. The press coverage tended to lean towards the defense and in favor of them. An example of this was an article in the Washington Post on July 14th by Philip Kinsley, where he said of Darrow, quote, his religion was that of tolerance. And he also said that Darrow warned that the fundamentalists were, quote, leading America back to the 16th century of ignorance and bigotry. The most famous part of the trial occurred on July 20th when Bryan took the stand. Darrow wanted to question him about his beliefs on the Bible and basically ridiculed them and particularly poked at Bryan's beliefs about the creation account and whether they were literal 24-hour days. During the questioning, according to the transcript in the New York Times, Bryan was quoted as saying that he wanted Darrow to, quote, have all the latitude he wants, for I'm going to have some latitude when he gets through. To which Darrow replied, you can have latitude and longitude. But Bryan never got his chance because Darrow ended the proceedings and asked the jury to convict his client. The next day, he'd made the point that he wanted to make. The Baltimore Sun on July 22nd noted, quote, Darrow would plead guilty, save that such a plea would make it impossible to appeal the case. After the conviction, Scopes was quoted in the Baltimore Sun saying, quote, I feel I have been convicted under an unjust law. I shall continue to fight the law. I cannot do otherwise and be true to what I believe. He was fined $100 and given $500 bail in lieu of an appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which the Baltimore Sun actually paid for him. The defense was never able to actually appeal their case to the U.S. Supreme Court, though, because it was overturned on a technicality by the Tennessee Supreme Court. The judge had fined him $100, and in Tennessee law, anything over $50 had to be done by a jury. What's interesting about the case is less its legal precedent and more its impact on the culture. It was technically a win but for the prosecution, but it was seen as more of a win for modernists and intellectuals by the major newspapers at the time. And that's kind of carried over into the present day. If you'd have asked me in my late teens or early 20s what it was about, I probably would have told you it was the law that made evolution legal to teach in the United States, which it wasn't. It wasn't repealed until 1967, the Butler Act, I mean. In reality, what it was one of many cultural battles between the fundamentalists and the modernists, one that the fundamentalists technically won, but served the modernists in the long run.